Hello guys, and welcome to the next installment of Hybrid Builds. Today we have the Hybrid Nightblade Damage Overtime build, and yeah, you guys just saw that right. I just resto ganked somebody. This is a really sweet build, guys. I have been loving putting hybrids together on the PTS, and in all honesty, I think this is probably the best one I've put together yet. This is a really solid build. It has great sustain, great healing power, and surprisingly insane amounts of damage that a lot of people have a lot of trouble dealing with, and you guys will see it here as the dots whittle him down into the ultimate for that quick kill. This, of course, is a rebuild of the Nightblade hybrid that I had done in the past called Caustic, but this is honestly just way better. I mean, I am so impressed with how this build turned out. I cannot say better things about it. Here you see this just tanky DK, and he's going to try to just out-tank the damage. Wrong call, man. You should have just hit. There's no way he's going to just tank that out. There's no way he's going to take that out. Anyway, guys, so a little bit different in this video. We have the footage at the beginning of the video, and the reason for it is because this build is honestly so darn weird. I wanted to include the gameplay footage at the beginning so you guys could see it in action first before I kind of showed you the weird skills, and everyone was like, oh, that just looks dumb, Jack. That won't work. Well, it does work, and I wanted to make sure that you guys saw that it did. Here you see I go for the kill, really risk it for the biscuit there by not preemptively healing myself. But, you know, it ended up working out, so whatevs. These guys are going to come back for round 2, and, I mean, you guys can just see it. Look at the sustain on this build. We're not having any resource issues, and these guys are beginning to fear the damage. They're beginning to fear the dots, and with good reason, because the dots really hurt. And of course, we're going to have the 2v1 encounter, which is what you guys were probably looking forward to seeing, the 2v1 on the hybrid. And you can see that we just really put a lot of damage. He does have a damage shield up, and it just melted his damage shield away, easily going for the stun into, of course, that bursty, merciless resolve. Something that I did want to note about this build is that it is a dot build, but it actually has like pretty freaking decent max stat and can deal some serious burst damage as well as having awesome dot capabilities. Anyway, though, I hope you guys enjoyed that little bit of snippet of gameplay. Let's jump into the build. Alright guys, so let's take a look at the stat page to begin with. So to start off, we are a Dark Elf. For this build, Dark Elf, I think, is one of the best choices because it gives you the maximum magicka and maximum stamina bonus that you kind of want. That being said, this build kind of pulls from all kinds of different pools, so you don't necessarily have to go Dark Elf. You're not losing out on a super huge amount if you don't do a Dark Elf, and that's just because our pools aren't super huge to begin with. Even going for something like a Wood Elf or something that gives you the regen would still actually be a good option for the build, but if you want to go for the highest damage route, you do want to pick Dark Elf. So taking a look at our pools, we can see that we have just about 21k magicka and just about 21k stamina, so just a little shy on those pools. So that's not terrible for a hybrid build. That's pretty standard for the hybrid builds we've been showing you guys. Coming in at 20k max stat is good, and we make up for the lack of max stat, of course, by having really high weapon spell damage values, and we'll get into how that gets buffed up on this build in a bit. Taking a look at the HP, we've got 22.5k in PvP. That's actually really awesome. 22.5k is not bad. You want to be over that 20k threshold in medium, I think, so 22 plus is pretty good for medium. So there you go. That's plenty of HP to work with. We are running Healing Word on this build, so that's something to keep in mind, is that'll give you a little bit more of a cushion when you start to take damage. And then finally, looking at the recoveries, we've got almost 1600 magicka and 1700 stamina, and then we do have Relentless Focus, so we buff up to 1850 stamina recovery there. So you can see the recoveries on this build are actually really good. Sticking with what we've been doing on the hybrid builds, we want to have that high recovery, and this build reflects that decision. We've got the really nice recovery on this spec. You shouldn't run out of resources. On top of it, we're running a resto staff as well. This is actually a bow resto build, as you saw from the footage, so the resto staff is going to be a huge part of your sustain too if you want it to be. It pretty much just gives you the ability to really spam magicka abilities on this build if you want. Not to mention the resto staff heavy attack is an important part of your damage combo on this build too, so that's going to play into your regen as well, just by passively being part of your outgoing damage. Taking a look at our weapon spell damage, we're going to buff up with a potion real quick. We're coming in at 3.8k weapon spell damage with our brutality buff. Now, we are running the infused master's bow on the back bar. So the infused enchant is going to bring us up to 4,400 weapon spell damage on our staff bar, and then the Master's Enchant is going to increase the damage further that we do to targets affected by our Poison Arrow ability by 301. Now, I did test this, and this bonus does count towards your Pelinals. This does not increase the amount of healing that you do, though, but it will increase the amount of damage that your spells do and that your heavy attack with your staff does as well. So that's a kind of an important part of this build, is to actually have the Master's Bow. I know, guys, that in my past builds, I've never run weapons like Master Weapons because they are relatively difficult to get compared to other set gears. That being said, for this build, the Master's Bow it just fits right in the spirit of building these hybrids. I didn't want to hold back. I wanted to include the Master's Weapon if it was really the best choice here, and I felt that it was. If you don't have a Master's Bow and you want to try this build out, don't worry, guys. You can always just double bar the other 5-piece set that we're running and worry about the Master's Bow once you get it. It's not a make or break for this build to have the bow, but it is a nice little increase in your damage when you do get it. Taking a look at the crits on our front bar, when we buff up, we're sitting at 43% weapon crit and 35.9% spell crit. And then on our bow bar, we're sitting at 50% weapon crit because we do have, of course, more crit on a bow than we do on other weapons. So our crit is actually pretty good on this build. Hybrid build is not super crit focused, but this is a damage over time build, so crits are going to be a portion of that. That being said, a majority of our damage over time abilities can crit, but something like 30% can't. So the crit, like I said, it helps, but it's not crazy important. Getting the weapon crit buff from your potion is one of the buffs that you can actually forego. You do need to run a weapon power potion for this build in order to have your weapon spell damage buffed up, but the crit is not as important as the weapon damage buff, and you can definitely get away without using that and maybe replacing it with a potion that gives you something else. Our physical spell resist on this build is, well, pretty standard medium armor, 18,500 and 18k physical resist. Not bad at all. Crit resist coming in at 2k. That's what we want to see for PvP. This is standard medium armor resists for a PvP build, and these kind of resists are going to give you, I think, the best kind of playability with medium armor while still allowing you to really go into the damage and sustain routes that you want to. For the Mundus, we are running the Warrior. Now, the Warrior Mundus was a choice here because it not only affected my outgoing damage, but it affected my healing as well. That being said, things like my poisons here and Valken Scoria will not deal bonus damage when I run the Warrior Mundus. Now, the reason I chose the Warrior is because it increases my healing, right? So you kind of have the option here. If you want to increase the damage that all of your dots do instead of just half of them, then you can run the Lover Mundus, and that will increase your penetration, increasing the damage all your dots do, save Slowed Semblance, which is an Oblivion dot and is not mitigated at all and will not be affected by penetration. If you go for the Warrior Mundus route, some of your dots will not deal as much damage because they won't have the penetration. However, you will have the more healing power, and I feel like for an open world build, you're better off going for the healing power. But I really wanted to mention that the Lover's an excellent choice for this build in case you were thinking about maybe throwing this spec together for PvE. I know that's not my expertise, but I know people do want to do some PvE hybrid stuff. So the Lover Mundus would be better for a PvE spec for this build. That being said, let's move on. We are running the Magicka Stamina Recovery drink. This is my favorite drink, and I've been running it on the past 2 hybrid builds that I did. I'm going to run it on this build too because it's so important for the sustain. Almost 500 Magicka Stamina Recovery from this drink for 1 hour. Super great. We don't need to worry too much about bulking up these max stats as we are playing the weapon spell damage game. So the max stats aren't a huge part of the build, and we do have great sustain, so we don't have to worry about having huge pools for sustain's sake either. So there you go. Super awesome drink for the build. And then finally, we are a stage 3 vampire. You could go stage 4 Vampire, so you get the Dark Stalker as well, and then you just have a little bit less health recovery. Doesn't really matter because the health recovery is kind of crap on this build anyway. The big advantage of Vampirism, of course, is going to be Undeath, synergizing really well with our Healing Ward, because the Healing Ward is going to take less damage due to Undeath as well. And then finally, that 10% regen is really great. It's really just going to help you keep the sustain up that you want on this build. Now, something I did want to mention about this build is that you can go non-Vampirism on it, and if you decide not to go Vampire, you will have quite a bit less Magicka Stamina recovery, about 100 to 150 less Magicka Stam recovery if you run this food. An alternative to running this food, if you're not a vampire, is to go for the purple food, which gives you the health recovery as well. Then you can easily push just 150 to 200 shy on the regen stats here, but then have 1k health recovery to back it up. Health recovery is super great for PvP, so it's just a thought if you didn't want to go the vampire route. It's actually a good option to go for that health recovery route as well. I play tested both of them, and I liked both very much. Alright guys, let's take a peek at the gear that we're wearing today, and I know you guys, I've teased it a little bit earlier. Let's check it out. So we're starting with Pelinal's aptitude set, and this is, well, like I've said before, the best hybrid set in the game, and this is kind of going to be the base, I think, of all really strong hybrid builds for this patch, at least until ZeniMax maybe adds some other sets that allow us to go for that max stat route hybrid. We're going to have to do the weapon spell damage stacking hybrid that Pelinal's really excels at. So here you can see we have the 5-piece Pelinals in our gear, and this is to give us that copy over from our weapon damage into spell damage. It also gives us a little bit of regen and some max health, which is going to be nice for PvP, of course. The other set that we're wearing is Valkynscoria. Now, because we are playing such a heavy damage over time build, Valkynscoria was a natural choice for it. We are on a Nightblade, so we have Minor Berserk. We don't need to go Slimecraw. Valkynscoria is going to deal a lot of burst damage with your dots on this build. Because we have so many damage over time effects, we've got 1 from this set, we've got 2 from the potions, and then we've got 2 damage over time abilities that we use ourselves, and then the resto heavy attacks. So that's 6 sources that can proc Valkynscoria. You will see it coming down a lot, and it will do quite a bit of damage. So there you go, guys. Absolutely fantastic set for a dot build. Highly recommend. The 1-piece max health is also great for PvP. So the final set that we have on the build is the Slode's Ring, and the Slode Semblance set, sorry. And the Slode Semblance set I actually chose because, of course, the 2, 3, 4-piece looked very hybrid-esque, and it was attractive to the build. I also liked that the 4th piece on it was the weapon spell damage attribute, and that's just because I don't have to lose max stat on swap, and I just lose the spell damage on swap, which is nice. Just plays a little bit into your sustain. But most importantly, there's a 10% chance when you deal damage to an enemy to put a Leeching Shadow on them, dealing 1k Oblivion damage every 1 second for 6 seconds. This is a crazy powerful dot in PvP, guys. 1k Oblivion damage is completely unmitigated. Battle Spirit doesn't affect it either. This will deal 1k unmitigated damage to a player through damage shields. There's no way for someone to reduce the amount of damage that this does to them. So there you go. This Oblivion dot is going to be very, very powerful. So this is going to be a very powerful dot in its own right, because essentially what you're looking at is a 12k dot over 6 seconds if you were to make this a PvE tooltip on it. Which is really nice because that's 12k and does not have to do with penetration. So that's why we chose the Slode Semblance. A second reason, of course, is because it's a 10% chance on any attack. This is a damage over time build. We are running Slodes only on our front bar, so the fact that it procs off any attack means that we'll have a very high chance of proccing it, even if we're not actively attacking someone with our front bar. Just by having our front bar out, the dots just ticking could cause Slodes to proc on the opponent. So there you go. Fantastic damage over time set, and this pairs absolutely fantastically with this build. If you want to play a dot build, you have to have some sets like this in your build to really put out that damage over time that you're looking for. And then finally, guys, we do have the Master's Bow. And this is just, like I had said, if you have a Master's Bow, it is really nice for this build. If you don't have it, you can definitely just go with the Slode's Bow. The advantage, of course, is that you're going to be proccing Slodes a little bit more often. Not necessarily a lot more often. The Master Bow is the better option. But, you know, you can get away with not using the Master Bow if you don't have it. So, just saying. That being said, it is a very good weapon. It's going to increase the amount of damage that we do with our dots, and we do have it as an infused bow as well to give us the weapon spell damage buff on top of it, so we get a huge amount of weapon and spell damage increase from this master bow when we throw a poison injection on someone. For the traits on the restoration staff, of course I went with Nirnhoned. This is weird, I know, but we're running a resto staff as our front damage bar. A damage resto build. Don't ask questions, guys. I'm a hybrid damage resto. I don't even know what to say anymore. It's like Buildcraft has just gotten so strange this patch that this is just fine now. I can just do this, and this won't even be weird anymore. So there you go. Damage resto on the front bar. Nirnhoned, highly recommend. Resto, of course, was chosen for the healing ward. You could go a Destro Staff on this build, but you'll have a lot less healing power and your survivability will go down quite a bit. So I really liked Resto for that, and of course the sustain. The poison that we run on here, of course, is the double damage poisons. This is going to do the 2 poison dots on the opponent for 4.5 seconds and then 6.4 seconds. So this is a nice dot to put on. This has a chance of proccing off of any of our weapon attacks, 20% chance. The Resto Heavy attack is a channeled 3-tick attack, so it has a 60% chance to put a poison on an opponent if you channel a full Resto Heavy on them. So that's actually pretty sweet. And then not only that, but the Resto Heavy can actually stun opponents because we have the off-balance passive in here as well. So this actually turns your Resto Heavy into a combination of really powerful damage, CC, and support ability. Very incredible thing to do with just a Resto Heavy, but I really liked how it turned out. You know, I honestly can't praise this build enough for how it turned out. So let's move on. Taking a look at the jewelry, we of course have infused jewelry with the weapon damage enchants. Pelinals 101, you must go infused, you must go weapon damage, you must go 5 medium, because that is Pelinals. Stack that weapon damage, turn it to spell damage, and reap the reward. And that's pretty much it. For the gear, guys, of course we have gone with Impenetrable and a mix of Well-Fitted. Impenetrable on our bigger pieces, so 3 Impen and 4 Well-Fitted. I really like this combo of 3 Impen, 4 Well-Fitted for just standard medium armor builds. The Impen's really nice, of course, to bulk you up against crits. Well-Fitted is going to play huge into your survivability. Your roll dodging and your sprinting are super important for PvP. And then finally, for the enchants, guys, you want to go with all the tri-stat Hacky Joe glyphs. And this is going to bulk up all of your max stat, which you need desperately. The HP, Magicka, Stamina, all of it you need. So this is definitely the glyph that you want to use for the gear. And I don't even have enchanted boots, so I'm actually just short a little bit. We should be at 21k max stat on this build. If Jack wasn't a noob and he would actually enchant his gear properly, the build would look a little bit nicer. But anyway, there you go, guys. That is the gear. Let's move on. Okay, so let's take a look at the abilities that we're using on this build. And this is going to be an interesting kit for you guys to look at. It's going to be very, very, very different, I think, from what you're used to seeing on a Nightblade. And that's why I put the footage first, because I wanted to show you guys that this kit is really effective before I showed you what the kit was. Because when you look at it on paper, you wouldn't think that it's as good as it performs in-game. So let's take a look at it. First ability that we have, of course, is Crippling Grasp. And we bulk up really, I'm just going to buff up real fast so you guys can see a little bit of a representation of the tooltip. 14k magic damage over 8 seconds. So actually a pretty bulky tooltip on Crippling Grasp. This is great. It's going to be the Immobilize and that damage over time. A little bit of flat damage to begin with as well. This is going to be one of your 2 mainstay dots for the build, and that's it. We only have 2 actual offensive dots on this build, and that is it. The rest comes from our sets and the Resto heavy attack, and there you go. This is going to be one of them. The next ability we have is Inner Light. This is here to give us that that spell crit buff, as well as the 5% max Magicka, plus the 2% for being a Mage's Guild skill. It's up to you if you want to run Inner Light. Like I said, the crit buffs are not super important for this build, but they do come in handy, you know, to determining that max damage in the end. So you can run Inner Light here. If you really want to run another skill on this build that I'm not running in the kit, Inner Light is the ability that you will replace with the skill of your choice. The next skill that we have is Healing Ward. Healing Ward is here as our burst heal for when our health is low, and it's really strong. I mean, Healing Ward is one of, if not probably the best heal that everyone has access to in the game, And putting it on a hybrid build is really sweet because you can pair it with a good stamina heal like Vigor, and you have actually a really strong amount of healing power on the hybrid. So it's cool because Nightblade has often kind of struggled with healing power, especially trying to go for some hybrid routes. I struggled going for the right weapon combination while still maintaining the healing power. So going for the resto staff was really sweet because it allowed us to run the healing ward. This is just going to up the survivability big time. Resto heavy attacks into healing ward. We've got lots of sustain on this build. You can pretty much just stall and never die one-on-one. And yeah, that's it. It's very strong. This shield, of course, synergizes really well with the Vampirism Undeath as well. The next ability we have is Relentless Focus. I went with the Relentless Morph because it gives us the 10% stam recovery. I wanted to really just bulk the recovery on this build as far as I could because I do like having high sustain on the Nightblade, so I can play a very kitey gameplay on it. Relentless Focus is going to be nice because you get to shoot that Spectral Bow as well. Due to the fact that we're doing so many heavies on the Resto Staff, you actually shoot quite a few arrows out of your Relentless Focus on this build during the course of normal combat. So this will be an ability that you'll have to just get used to using quite often, and it's going to hit very hard. This is going to be pretty much your distance burst ability to put that big chunk of damage on top of your dots to maybe finish a target off in a fight at a distance. And then finally, this of course will give us also Minor Berserk, which is going to increase all the damage that we do, including our Oblivion Dot, including our Valken Scoria. So the Minor Berserk buff, very important for a hybrid build. The next ability we have is Shadow Image, and Shadow Image is one of my favorite abilities because it's so trolly. I mean, you guys all love Shadow Image. You throw the shade down, you no longer need a target for it. You can just jump away and teleport, or it just won't work. Wow. I think I'll just leave that in because that was actually kind of funny. So normally you can teleport back to your Shadow Image, but today it wasn't going to work for me. Maybe I just waited too long. Damn, I'm such a noob. I'm sorry, guys. That was kind of funny. So you could use Shadow Image to throw a shade down and teleport back to it. This is, of course, super great for PvP. You can just use it to confuse people, to kite them, troll the crap out of them. And I really like it for the line of sight game that you can play with it. You can shade behind something, go into your cloak. People have a really hard time locking you down with Shadow Image. And of course this patch, the fact that you don't need a target in order to set the shade down and then teleport back to it, makes this ability so much better because you can use it in much more creative ways than you could before. And then finally for the ultimate, guys, Flawless Dawnbreaker. We've been here so many times. Flawless Dawnbreaker, of course, is going to be your ultimate of choice for the hybrid build. It's going to be the one that bulks both your weapon damage and spell damage thanks to Pelinal's stacking. And it's very important you run Flawless on your Resto Staff on this build to make sure that you up your Resto Staff damage as far as possible. You actually can hit like pretty beefy Resto Staff heavies. I was able to get 8k crit ticks on my Resto Staff in PvE. So in PvP, you could reasonably see 10k plus Resto Staff full heavy attacks on players. And that's quite a bit of Resto Staff heavy attack damage because it is undodgeable. And Flawless Dawnbreaker is, of course, going to play into that. Not just the Resto heavy, but all of your outgoing dot damage on this bar, as well as your Relentless Focus. Do a lot more damage thanks to Flawless being here. So let's take a look at the bow bar, guys. The bow bar is set up like a dot bow bar really should be. We're starting, of course, with Poison Injection. With the Master's Bow, Poison Injection, of course, is going to buff our damage that we do as well. So Poison Injection, really important for this build. The damage over time that it does is super sweet. The tooltips are a little misleading on this side. They're a little bit lower than they would be on my other side, and that's just simply because the bow bar just doesn't pack as much damage as the Nirnhone front bar does. If we look at the tooltips on the front bar, you can see they actually go up to about 10k almost on the dot. 9,400 poison damage. So not bad at all. And that's kind of the tooltip that we care about because this is where we're going to be when this dot is ticking heavily anyway. So Poison Injection is going to be great, of course, because that dot will deal more damage as the opponent's health drops below 50%, effectively acting as your execute dot. Lethal Arrow is the next ability we have. This is nice because it's a little bit of burst damage, but that's really not why it's here. The big reason we got it here is for that Major Defile buff 10 seconds of 30% reduced healing and health recovery. For a dot build, this is super important. This is just part of your condition spam. Playing a dot build, you want to put as many negative effects on the target as possible that are going to hinder them from healing themselves, as well as from purging the damage that's on them. And this is just one of the many things that will make it harder and harder for your opponent to deal with the damage over time that you do. Lethal Arrow is actually a huge part of it. 30% healing debuff is massive. Then, of course, we have Vigor, guys. Vigor is here for that stamina-based heal. So we do have the Magicka-based heal and a stamina-based heal, so you can defend yourself with both Magicka and stamina, as well as attack with both Magicka and stamina, which is exactly what we want on the hybrid build. Vigor is great because it's a nice heal over time, and it pairs really well with Healing Ward. Your health drops, you pop a Healing Ward, go into Vigor, roll dodge, and you're pretty much just going to be healing a lot. You know, by the time they chew your Healing Ward away, your Vigor will have healed quite a bit of your HP. So it's a really good heal to pair with Healing Ward. I've been enjoying this combo a lot. It's not something I've got to play with before, so there you go. And then we've got Piercing Mark. Piercing Mark is also a very important skill for this build, and the reason it's so important is because it's that physical and spell resistance debuff. That 5,200 debuff on our physical spell resist for 30 seconds is going to increase the amount of damage that we do to our target by around 8%. All our dots will be dealing about 8% more damage, except the Oblivion one. This is a big deal. You want to run Piercing Mark. Piercing Mark is one of the cool abilities that actually debuffs both armors, and it makes it really great for a Nightblade hybrid. And the reason I went with the Piercing Morph is even if we're fighting an opponent that doesn't use stealth, the Piercing Morph is going to throw extra negative effects on the target, and like I had mentioned, that's just part of preventing our opponent from being able to properly purge the dots on them by putting more and more condition spam on top of them. So there you go, Piercing Mark, very, very nice, not only for that stealth and tech, but just for the hybrid gameplay in general. Absolutely fantastic skill for debuffing. And then we have Shadowy Disguise, and this is, of course, access to the Nightblade Stealth. We chose the Shadowy Disguise morph because this is the only one that grants stealth anymore. The fact that our next damage attack within 3 seconds will be a critical strike does not really matter, because we don't have a ton of burst on this build. Well, that's a little misleading. Our burst is actually, like, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not a burst build. So Crit Cloak, the crit portion of it's not huge, but that stealth is really what we want. The stealth, of course, is going to give us access to our armor passives for 7.5 seconds too, so that's really sweet. And then finally, for the ultimate on the bow bar, we went with Incapacitating Strike. And this is, you guys might be a little surprised why I went with Incap. And Incap was a good choice because it is actually one of the best damage over time ultimates that you can run. Not only will it defile the enemy, reducing their healing and health recovery, which is, like I had mentioned, awesome for a dot build, but on top of it, it will increase the damage that you deal against them by 20% for 6 seconds. This includes all of your dots. Everything that you do is 20% buffed for 6 seconds. So essentially, Incap is like that super deadly stun that you're probably not going to survive the aftermath of. And I use it as the finish on this build, or just as the stun when I need a stun, and I don't have an opportunity to get the off-balance heavy attack stun down on the opponent. So there you go. This is going to be pretty much the only ultimate you use for this build. You won't be using Flawless Dawnbreaker very much at all. You'll just be using Incap and relying on that big damage increase that it gives you. That being said, if you don't want to go with Incapacitating Strike, you can definitely go with the Bow Ultimate, morph to the Ballista. The Ballista is going to be ultimately the highest DPS dot burst that you can throw down, but it costs way more ultimate, and I think in the practicality of PvP, Incap is the better choice. That being said, you could definitely go Ballista for that massive amount of distance dot burst if you really want to. Alright guys, let's take a look at the champion points that we're running on this build. Starting in the green tree, taking a look at the tower, we have got 30 Warlord, 10 in Sprinter, and 3 in Bashing Focus. This is incorrect. Jack is a noob. Here we go, we're just going to fix it. There we go. So we have 1 point left over. We'll just put it in Siphoner, it doesn't really matter. So there you go. We have to break free, we have to sprint, and we have to bash. And in that order, so we have a nice spread following that kind of idea. In the Lover tree, we've got 64 Mooncapped, 56 Arcanist, and 11 in Tenacity. Big focus on Mooncap Arcanist because we have quite a bit of regen on this spec. We really want to play to that strength. Tenacity, of course, I put a few points in because we are running the Resto Staff, and we get a ton of Magicka back from that Resto Staff, so Tenacity is going to be nice for the build too. The important passive, of course, is Wind Running. That Sprint Magicka Recovery is super dope. The movement speed is not super noticeable, but it does come in handy. In the Shadow tree, we have got 28 in Shadow Ward, and we have got 48 in Tumbling. So this is going to reduce the cost of our dodge roll and reduce the cost of blocking. We are in medium armor, so dodge roll is going to be more important to have the reduced cost of. That being said, we don't want to neglect block because block, of course, is important for PvP as well. Taking a look at the blue tree, we have 19 in Elemental Expert and 18 in Spell Erosion. So in the Apprentice, we don't have a lot of points here, just enough to really get that Spell Precision passive for that 12% spell crit, and that's kind of the important part. If you're hurting for points, just put 30 points in this tree if you're not max CP yet, so you can kind of keep your points in other trees. In the Atronach, we have dumped super heavy, 120 points into the Atronach, 63 Staff Expert, 6 Physical Weapon, and 51 Master at Arms. This tree is pretty much dedicated to bulking up the staff damage bar, and it's quite good actually. Not only that, but it gives us access to the Tactician passive, which when we roll dodge and attack, we can set an enemy off balance, and on top of it, if you heavy attack an off balance opponent, it will stun them. So a partial charged bow heavy at a distance is a really easy way to put out a quick, hard to see stun on an opponent that you just dodged an attack from. Also, a fully charged resto heavy will stun the opponent at the end of the attack as well. So you have a stun off the end of your heavies if you roll an attack. So that's actually where one of the stuns from this build will come from outside of Incapacitating Strike. And something I did want to mention is the Butcher passive is nice for that 5% bonus damage on our light and heavies against enemies below 25% health. And that's just because we are running no execute on this build, as it is a dot build, and our execute is basically going to be our resto heavy attack and maybe an in-cap stun. So that's going to play into finishing off targets here. In the Ritual tree, we have dumped 93 points, and we've gone 56 in Thaumaturge. That's right, damage over time build, heavy focus on Thaumaturge for that 20% increased damage over time. 19 in Mighty and 18 in Piercing to mimic what we had in our Apprentice tree as well. So we actually have a nice even focus between Magicka and Stamina outgoing damage on this build, with of course a bit of a focus on that Resto Staff heavy attack and damage over time. The important passive in this tree, of course, is the Exploiter for that 10% bonus damage against off-balance enemies. That's part of just putting and stacking heavy damage into targets on this build. The Exploiter passive is going to come in real handy. You dodge one attack, and they are going to be taking 10% bonus damage from all your dots for a while. So it really changes the edge of the fight, I think, this passive here. So for this build, I think it's very important to get that Tactician passive and the Exploiter passive. I know it has a very high CP requirement, but that is really what you want to focus on for this build to make it work really well. Taking a look at our red tree, we've got 61 Ironclad and 50 Resistant, 9 Spell Shield, 9 Medium Armor Focus. Focus on Ironclad here because a lot of bursty abilities are going to be direct damage attacks. Focus on Resistance, of course, because in PvP, crits are going to hit really hard, and you want to mitigate critical damage because then you take less damage. A little bit in Spell Shield and Medium Armor Focus, just to bulk up our physical spell resist by a little bit. And, of course, the points are here because they're very front-end heavy. In the Lady tree, we've got 27 Hardy, 27 Elemental, and 11 Thick-Skinned. This is just to bulk up the amount of resistance we have against incoming physical and Magicka attacks between these two, and we have a little bit in Thick-Skin for incoming damage over time. We do have Cloak to really suppress damage over time, but that being said, we're going to take quite a few dots outside of Cloak as well, because we can't just have 100% Cloak uptime. And then in the Lord tree, we have got 43 Quick Recovery and 13 in Bastion. So focus on Quick Recovery here because we do have 2 heals and a little bit in Bastion for our healing ward. We are a vampire with Undeath, so a little bit of Bastion does not hurt on this spec at all. But of course, that focus on the Quick Recovery is going to mean that we'll be able to easily heal ourselves in PvP. Alright guys, so let's take a look at a little bit more footage. This is a PTS build, so the first clip that I included for you guys is actually footage of this build on the PTS. And this clip here is just an old clip I had of the old Hybrid Nightblade spec, which is a damage over time spec, but I ran the Lightning Staff instead of the Resto Staff. So I will say one thing about it is that this video here, the build in this video is much weaker than the hybrid build that I showed you on the PTS here. The PTS build is very, very strong, but this is just older footage I had of an older version of this spec, so I hope you guys enjoy it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this build video. If you did, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. I work on these builds all the time, and I like to do them live on stream, so if you guys want to catch me live and maybe see some of the build craft or see some PvP live, you can feel free to check me out on Twitch. Link, of course, to that is in the description. And then finally, guys, we are sponsored by What the Fast. They are a VPN for gamers, and they give me better ping to ESO. It's a local Canadian company. If you guys get crap ping to your favorite games and you maybe want to fix your ping problems, maybe a VPN is what you're looking for. So if you guys want to give it a shot, it is free to try, of course, from the link in the description below. And finally, guys, I am planning on finishing up the hybrid build series, so I hope you guys are enjoying them so far, and I hope you stay tuned for the Warden and the DK hybrid that we have coming up. If you have not seen my Templar or Sorc hybrid builds, they are different from this one. They're all different builds, specific to the class, specific to the gameplay that we're looking for on them, but they all have that hybrid base on them, so you guys can check those other builds out if you like on my channel. And that's it. Have a great day, guys. If you have any suggestions for future builds for me, feel free to throw them in the chat. Any comments and questions, throw them down in the comments below. Have a great night.